Okay. Okay. So, like I said, we're going to do the contract changes. TREC doesn't have them up there. There was a class Tammy and I did a while ago where they had nice lined out things. This is the closest I can find from the legal update course. And if you haven't taken it in the last few months, it probably isn't.
Legal one last night, and then
was this on it? Regardless, when we take these, sometimes we brush over these. Yes, you're gonna say yes, but I wasn't paying attention. Is that what you got? Yes. I can't find this. Are you on the Mag Real Estate?
Yeah, Mag Real Estate. This is me. This is when I went to live.
So it doesn't say on there that we're live?
Yeah, it did ask like some questions in the quizzes
about that stuff. Yeah. Yeah. It's yeah. So, anyways, I pulled it from that because I think it's going to be easier to go through. So we're going to see a little bit of the line items. Now, I will say this: I'm not going to to go into straight details with everything because some of the stuff is just very. It's just like verbiage. Can you mute it?
No.
Okay, you know what? I don't need to put up with this. Okay, so she's like, "What happened?"
I was like, "What happened?"
Okay, so let's go. So first, what we're going to do is the TREC, the promulgated contracts, right? The ones that we have to use. We're going to do the changes on that stuff first, and then we'll go into the representation agreements, which are not promulgated but have been changed by TR. Okay, so first and foremost, this is something that has come up a few times, and it's like where it says escrow agent, and sometimes you feel like, okay, the first one is supposed to be for the agent's name itself, and then the second one is the company. This is basically saying now they're going to be capitalizing it, and the escrow agent is basically, it can be a person, but it is a title company or an individual like an attorney or a sole proprietor. So basically what's that saying is it can be a person, but it has to be somebody that is not like a title company. So if you're using a title company, in both sections, you put the title company. Now,
not the escrow officer.
Not the escrow officer, but I would suggest, and what I am still doing, is I'll put, Susie Bishop, I'll put Providence Title is where she is now. Providence Title / Susie Bishop. Because when you're dealing with the other person, like let's say you're submitting the offer, they're the last ones to sign. You want them to send it to them too, right? You want them to know. So I put both in there. And then on the second line where you're talking about earnest money and option fee, just put the title company. Does that make sense?
Are these new forms in our zip forms now?
So Zips forms, they should automatically update when they are the date they're actually required. They should then be put in there.
Okay.
So until we know an exact date, which I thought they said November 4th, but that may be when they're ending the commenting period, and it may be January before they're actually required.
The legal one class that I took yesterday, it said something about January.
January, yeah, I think that could be. Okay, so. But they should come up as soon as we see them. So, okay, so a couple of things here in 3A, a minute to say the cash portion of the sale price, which is like, it pretty much already said that. They're just kind of changing the verbiage, right? The new required notices. So this is again just changing the verbiage where it says the following notices have been given and attached to the contract. For example, a mud pit. So if you are representing the seller in this, okay, because let's say you're representing the seller and your buyer doesn't know, or you're representing the buyer and y'all don't really know. As a selling agent, this is something you should definitely be aware of, right? You need to go to the CAD and find out if there is a mud or a PID in this house. Ask the seller; they'll probably know because they have to pay for it, right? But a lot of times when you get an offer, this may not be in there. And so if it's not, you need to make sure that that gets amended and put in. Otherwise, it's going to be like you're not being forthcoming with that information. Even if you're not aware, you still don't want to get into that kind of situation. So just they're rewording it to say that it has been given and attached to this contract. So if there is anything, there's no doing it later. It needs to be done right now. And I think that's the verbiage that they're trying to clear up. Okay. So this is kind of interesting here. So you see the completion of repairs. What this is saying is you can see where they've lined out must be obtained and they've lined out this little 2 and all and this 1. Basically, they're taking out any of the guesswork of like when this is supposed to be done, how it's supposed to be done. Because if you say must be obtained, then you could say, well, we could close because this person's been hired, but it hasn't been done, right? And so I think they're trying to change it to where it's like there's no question. The seller shall, this underlined is all new. The seller shall provide buyer with copies of documentations of the repair persons showing that the scope of work and payment and the work has been completed. And the seller expense arranged for the transfer of, and then they're lining out, the documentation, they're lining out a couple of things, will be transferred, all these things. Any transferable warranties will be, so it's not like, oh, I could give it to you. No, you will, with respect to repairs and treatments. So it's basically saying there's no option, or you could do this, or you are going to complete the work before closing, and you are going to transfer warranties before closing and provide receipts for payment and completion before closing. There's just no question anymore. There used to be, and I had that happen a couple times, and it's a nightmare because then, obviously the buyer wants it done immediately, but the guy may have said, well, it's going to be 2-3 weeks before I can schedule it. And that wasn't really made clear because the seller wanted to make it sound like no big deal. He's going to be coming out, but it's actually going to be a while. And then there's some tension there, right? And so this is basically saying we're no longer making it gray area. It has to be done before closing. Okay. So when you have your inspections and there's any work to be done, like you want to get that, regardless of what side you're on, you want it done as quickly as possible, and you want to either provide or receive receipts as soon as possible, because clearly it's going to go past the option period, but you have to make a decision. Do you want to extend option for that to be done, or are you just going to terminate if they don't do it? Extending, if you're on the buyer side, extending the option is going to be better. If you're on the seller side, heck no. Right? I mean, because you don't want the option period to be there. Mm-mm.
I was about to go.
Hmm. Okay, so this is just a section showing what it's going to look like. So this is just without the line items, the new what it's going to look like. And again, this is more like just verbiage than anything. You know what I mean? We're not changing the way we do things. We're just changing verbiage.
Oh yeah.
The heck are y'all doing? Yeah, get out. And of course, Tammy goes to the rescue. So it's trying to say the benefit to your client. Your clients have more information about the scope of work. If you're on a buy client, right? They have more information on the scope. They know when and what's being done, and it just makes it more clear. So I mean, I agree with that. But how many people are going to read that anyway? So us as agents, it's up to us to make sure that all of that paperwork is done, regardless of what side, and make sure that everything is, what I mean, like it's all done, taken care of, clean, paperwork's been exchanged, and everything's done. So as a selling agent, you should print out change contract and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. So we already kind of covered that. You don't have to worry about brokers. So 9B, the private transfer fees, I believe that they just, so basically this is all brand new. None of this was in here. So this is kind of weird to me because so we're talking about the actual 1 to 4, right? And it's basically saying that the obligation of the transfer is the seller's, unless otherwise provided in this contract, right? So, but then you have a third party addendum, right? That then spells out who's paying for what. So I am kind of I would really love to talk to somebody on the broker lawyer committee, because I'd like to know, like, what's the purpose of this if there's already going to be a form to spell this out. But they're just adding this in, basically saying that unless otherwise specified, the current owner, the seller, is going to be paying for it. Okay.
I guess that's if somebody forgets to fill out the addendum.
But if they forget to fill it out, and if the box is checked that it is in an HOA, or the title company starts doing their work and realizes it's in an HOA, nobody's moving forward until the title company gets the third party addendum, because they need to know who's paying. So I guess you could make the argument that, well, with this, okay, then the seller is paying, but they still are going to want signatures on that addendum, right? I mean, I don't think anybody's going to move away from using that and just assume, you know. So there's that change. In 21, they've changed this verbiage here to say with a copy to the buyer's agent or with a copy to the seller's agent at whatever. I guess they're trying to make sure that whatever is conveyed to your buyer or seller, title is also conveying to you. So they're not talking to your client without you knowing, is essentially.
What would go after that?
After the agent, it would our email address.
Oh.
It would be ours. So you would put in, like, I mean, I don't know about y'all, but I usually just put in like a phone number and email. Yeah. And I don't put in their address, because really you shouldn't be needing to mail them anything. And then I'll just put in my email there, which they're going to have anyways on the broker sheet. So, you know, again, some redundancy, but I think what they're trying to do is get title to understand that when you communicate with our people, you communicate with us as well. So, and I'm sure that came from some lawsuit.
I felt like that, like right now on TREC and on the zip forms, it's all the old forms, but I feel like in the beginning when they were saying by August whatever, that they updated on there. They must have taken them back off. They must have, because I would agree with you, because I got my buyer's rep off the zip form.
Well, the only thing, so
so
Texas Realtors already updated forms, the agreement forms, but TREC hasn't updated anything yet.
Okay.
So if you're seeing updated forms, it's probably the listing agreement, the buyer's agreement, you know, those things are already updated.
The 1 and 4 was on there, and they had to have taken it off.
I don't know.
Maybe they did.
Okay, so there's that. So the seller's disclosure paragraph on the unimproved farm and ranch and new home, complete or incomplete, it's been amended to add a checkbox to each disclosure item so that you can select what's going to be there, or if the seller is not aware or whatever. So they're just changing a checkbox or adding a checkbox to which one you want. So not a big change there, but so we don't use a lot of farm and ranch, but when we do, there's a bunch of stuff that's being added. So, and notice added to that states that the form is designated for use in sales in existing farms and ranches of any size, and it's not for use in complex transactions. Now, the reason it's saying that is because the farm and ranch contract kind of mirrors the 1 to 4 with a few additions. But when you're getting into large ranches with several tracks and a lot of water tanks and wells, and you just have a lot of stuff on it, that's something that probably needs to be like an attorney written contract. It's not something that you want to use this for because it just doesn't cover everything. This is something that like you can use for up to, I would say, probably 10 acres. And then after 10 acres, you need to really start thinking about, is this correct? And that's just a general guideline that I use for myself to be like 10 acres is kind of cut off. And even if it's 10 acres and they are producing coastal hay or whatever, you could still use this because there's portions for that. But if they have a lot of complex things on there, it's probably not going to work for this. So and I read through all of this, and y'all are welcome to also, but there's just a lot of terms that are changed. Like they're saying counties instead of county that the property is in because properties can reside in two counties, right? They're saying to the term house and garage, plural. They're making it plural, so because some can have multiples of these things. So realistically, it doesn't change how we use this contract or anything major like that. It's just they're just updating terms based on what they've found from people using these contracts. So I don't want to spend a whole ton of time there. They did add this, and they kind of added this sort of a thing to all of the contracts, saying basically do not sign if there is a separate agreement for payment for the broker's fees, and sharing between it is not fixed, controlled, recommended, or suggested, or maintained by the Texas Real Estate Commission. So they're basically putting this in there to absolve themselves of any price fixing, right? And to inform buyers and sellers that it is negotiable. Now, at this time of selling of writing the contract, to me, it seems a little unnecessary because you should already have a buyer's agreement, which states what you're getting paid, or you should already have a listing agreement, which states what you're getting paid. And this kind of information is also on both of those forms. So it's just redundant, but they wanted to add it in because they just don't want another lawsuit. They're just being overly careful, right? Um, so there's that. Now the condominium one really isn't used a lot. But you can see from paragraph 2B, 2C that they're just clarifying timing related to termination. They're amending in 12A to accept regular periodic maintenance fees and assessments that are prorated under the contract. In paragraph 13, the party's obligation to pay under this section, as well as cost fees provided in paragraph 2. So they're trying to clarify the different, or at least lead you to the different areas where some of these fees and things should be set out, who's paying what. Does that make sense? So again, we're just kind of changing verbiage. We're not changing anything crazy. The amendment of contract does have something to add a notice to consult an attorney. And in paragraph 7, they are saying that the contract's in paragraph 2 of the amendment dealing with repairs. So they're clarifying repairs. And you can see this section down here where they're saying consult with an attorney before signing. I kind of, I guess that wasn't on there before because it was just an amendment, and it says to consult an attorney on the contract. So I guess they're just trying to, again, cover themselves to put this in here as well, so there's no confusion or nobody gets sued. But that's really it. There's not much changing on the addendum except for that. Seller financing addendum is also getting a section that says to consult an attorney or financial professional before signing. My only guess on these things is they're just really trying to get people to consult attorneys. They're really, or at least give them the option. And then if they say, well, I wasn't informed, it's like, well, it was on 17 different contracts that you signed, like there was no way you couldn't have seen that. So we all know that when an attorney gets involved, the situation gets a little more sticky. That doesn't mean that in some situations it's not a good idea for people to do. And I wouldn't, I don't look at it like attorneys are trying to blow up deals. I just they're trying to do their job, and they feel like they're like the government. They feel like if they don't do anything, people don't think they're doing anything, so they have to change things constantly for no good reason. So they're always going to find something that I think you should do this or I think you should do that, and you can work through it. It's just extra steps. So don't be afraid of people getting an attorney if they want to, especially if it's not common and it's something different. Um, so there's a lot of amendments to the seller financing addendum, which seller financing we don't deal with a lot, but um, there's so reading through these, there's not a lot that are like really a big deal or like process has changed. Again, we're just you know um, we're just changing the verbiage to cover things. So um, let's go to one that we use. So the mandatory property ownership. Okay, so you can see in here they have lined out, okay, on this the fees and deposits on the HOA. So they lined out where it says except as provided by paragraph A and D. So basically what they're doing is regardless of what you put in paragraphs A and D, the fees and deposits are going to be determined by what's written on this line. So it says in A and D that they are like the seller is to get the packet, the form, and order these things and pay for it up front. It basically says that, or it's like seller or buyer will get these things up front, right? So basically, what this is clarifying is saying, regardless of what you guys say of who's doing this and who's paying for it, that the buyer is going to pay any and all association fees, deposits, reserves, other changes in association and transfer of the property not to exceed X, and the seller pays the rest. Which that was all there, but I guess there was some confusion if they say that the seller is supposed to get and pay for up front and then be reimbursed by the buyer X amount. They wanted to take that out because they wanted to make it more clear, I think, that the buyer is paying for this. And we all know that title is the one who ends up talking to the HOA and getting everything going. So I think maybe that caused some confusion, and sellers were thinking like, well, okay, now I got to call my HOA and I got to do this. And so they wanted to take that line out. And then they're saying that it doesn't apply to the regular periods of maintenance, fees, assessments, or dues, costs that are provided in paragraph A and D. So like, what?
Yeah.
So basically they're saying that this fee they're going to pay regardless, and this does not apply to any of the other paragraphs. Okay, so regardless of what you put in there, this is what they're going to pay. So I mean, realistically, it doesn't change anything. It just means that you need to be aware of how much the fee is. Now a lot of times in, say, like Sabor, you're required to put what that fee is, so you have to look it up ahead of time if you're listing it, right? If you're on the buy side and you're in Sabor, you can look at it, and I would say it's safe to just say that if they put it in there, you can go off of that amount. But you don't want to go over that amount, or I mean, you can go under, but you don't want to go over. So you need to know what the amount is, and then what they're willing to pay, right? Like a lot of times, I'll like to put just like we'll pay $150 because all of them are 250, 300. Some of them are excessive. Some of them are $600. And I don't I don't want my client, if I have a buyer, I don't want them to pay an exorbitant amount of money. So I will try to stay at like a 50-50. Like we'll split it. If it's $300, I'll pay 150. If it goes over that, like I don't want to pay more than 150. Sorry, that's it. But if it's only 200, then I only want to pay 100. Right? So just be aware of what it is and what you're putting in there, because your clients are going to be on the hook for that.
So do you feel like also depending on what time of the year it is, like I know like taxes are prorated, so like if they've been in the HOA
almost the whole year. Like the sellers live there till November. Don't you feel like he's used that year of dues?
Yes, because in that situation, then in like a month or two, you would be required to pay the full next year. But it is in advance, right? It's the next year. But we're not talking about regular fees. We're talking about transfer fees. Yeah. So that's something. Let's say they pay in January and you're buying in June. That year should still be paid. It's already paid, right? So it's just a transfer fee that we're talking about. Okay. Third party addendum. So this is when they put, so other financing, they've added all of this in. Um, it has the same fields, right? Like what's the amount, how many years, what's the interest, all of this. But it's just, I guess they wanted to put in other financing for like something that's weird, like if it's owner financing or if it's something that is just not covered on the other boxes. They wanted to provide a spot um, for for this to be put in. Um, I'm trying to think of what's not. The only thing I can think of is seller financing. Is the only thing I can think of that is not really covered on there. But that way you don't have to put it in special provisions, which they want you to stay away from, right? So I guess they just added that so that you have that option to use them there. I wouldn't anticipate using it a lot. But
So I have a question.
go.
So if you were using like a Texas VA land, like you were buying 10 acres,
Mm-hmm.
could you potentially use the VA land for some of your loan versus and like pay your house for some of the loan? Can you separate them like that, or did they have to be all together? That's just my thought in that.
So are you saying you're using some seller finance and some
No,
Texas
I'm
VA
saying
or
like let's just say you're a veteran and you
yeah?
qualify for a land and you want
Okay.
to buy 10 acres, but it has a house on it. So can you use some of it for land and then some of it for the house, or does it all have
So
to be one?
the ultimate decision on that is obviously up to the lender. However, I will say a lot of times, most of the time, if there is a house on the property,
Yeah.
you cannot just do a land loan on it.
Because like
that just happened with my 13 acres.
Yeah.
It is that little house that was on there.
Yeah.
It didn't even have any value. Like if you look at the CAD,
Right.
it shows that little house, but there's no value. It was just a little.
Yeah.
And then the problem becomes
but the VA, those people were.
They said there's a dwelling, right?
Yeah. So they made them. That's why they had to go in. It's like it wasn't even. It was just like a shack that they made them go in and put like flooring on there and stuff to qualify.
Because the VA is like the FHA, right?
Yeah.
The VA is just insuring the loan, and it just like the FHA. So they have like these same guidelines almost. And so there's like certain lender required repairs and stuff. So if there's a dwelling on it, they're gonna require that. So in that situation, if they want to do something like that, it might be better to get to do like seller finance or something that isn't going to have to conform to that. So leases and fixtures, they've updated a little bit. They've struck out closing except the following. I mean, I guess I don't really know why because I don't see what they're adding, but basically saying at closing, buyers shall assume whatever the following leases are, right? Solar panels, propane tank, whatever. And they're saying at closing except the following. So I guess they're putting in these check boxes instead of having you just write out, what you do and don't have on there, and then they're providing an empty box for something that you may not have. So I guess it just makes it look cleaner, right? I guess that's all they're really trying to do there. Loan assumption addendum. Again, this is a seller finance type thing, or this is when they're taking a loan on. Effective date and title company are capitalized. So because they're defined terms. So if you've ever seen on the contracts, like it just seems like something is randomly capitalized, it's because there's somewhere in the contract that thing is defined. whatever that is. Escrow agent, for example, on the 1 to 4 is capitalized because later on in the contract it explains what they mean by that. So anytime you see something capitalized, it's going to be explained as exactly what that term is. And so effective date and title company are being capitalized because they're defined. I don't know that there's much else on there that needs to be explained. It's pretty. So this is okay. This is added in authorization and release of information, so that the lender that's being assumed has is authorized to furnish the to seller or buyer at their respective information related. So basically, they're putting this in without having initials or anything like that, so that the lender can provide information to either side, whoever is requesting it, without any further authorization from anyone. Again, this is a form that we very rarely use, so I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on it. It's not going to change much. And I think that's all. Oil and gas mineral form. They're just replacing a phrase, reserve and retain implied with waive. Okay. There you see there, take that out, put that in.
No one usually sells the mineral rights, do they?
They try not to. But then there's some people that will, that won't buy without it. And then sometimes it's like a 50-50. I mean, it's completely a negotiation. But a lot of times what we find now, because this sort of thing has been going on for so long, that there's owners that don't. It was 4 owners ago that has the mineral rights. So there's nothing.
So you could have a property,
nothing you can do.
Come digging up oil, but they're just going to wreck your land. You don't get any money out of it.
So that's
yes
the
and no.
ingress and the egress.
Right. So that's they have the right to ingress and egress, but you are allowed in a lot of the forms, and you have to look at like how it was written, but you're allowed a certain, let's call it an allowance, for them to do that, and for the damage that they're doing to the surface of your property. You're allowed to collect X, whatever they put in there for that.
It's like when they run a pipeline through your property.
Yeah. So they're gonna pay to have it all done. But let's say you have coastal hay, and they're gonna take a 6-foot swatch of it, and they're gonna dig it all up. Well, then you're gonna require them to replant or what, and you can recover like lost crops, and you know what I mean. So you have some recourse with it, but anything being pulled out, if they're pulling oil out of the ground, somebody else has it. Well, water you can, but that's something that the state regulates, because it's a natural resource that.
That's another thing, that on that 13 acres, she has water rights, so she gets a check every year. She kept those.
Yeah. So somebody's pulling the water, and she gets money for it. Yeah. So now if she goes to sell the property, she could retain that,
She did.
and she would still get the money.
She retained the water and the mineral rights.
Yeah. So
That was the first transaction I've ever had where somebody actually kept all that.
yeah.
Right.
And that's something that, when they want to do that, you got to work with title, or if there is already somebody 3 owners ago that has the mineral rights, or you have someone like that where somebody wants to keep, all of those situations, title is going to be able to help tell you what the current state of those rights are, and how to write it to where somebody gets to keep it or not. But we do have this addendum that you can use if they do have the right to keep it or sell it or transfer it. Then you use this addendum to specify what you want to do with it. And I think we'd have to look at the actual contract, but anytime you do a large property like that, I think you need to do this amendment just to say, like, because there's a portion in there, I believe, that says, like, you understand that you're not getting the rights to it, so you may need to use that regardless, or it may be in the actual, I don't think it's on the farm and ranch. There might be a little blip on it, but regardless, if you get into that situation and you're doing one of those, we'll figure it out what exactly needs to be done. So that's it on like the TREC contracts. Again, like just a lot of rewording, nothing really major changing. Now, when we go into the representation forms, these are changing. Okay. And does it change how we do business? Not really, but it may change how we talk to people. Okay. So let's start with the buyer forms. We now have a long form, they're calling it, which is the form that we had before.
Those are already updated.
Yes, these are already in place. And the other is the buyer rep short form. Now, I'm going to kind of do these both at the same time, and because they do mirror each other quite a bit. So if you look at the short form, you have parties, appointments, definitions, and if you look at the long form, you have parties, appointments, definitions. But what's the first thing you notice? There's a whole lot more verbiage here, a whole lot more information. So just right off the bat with that right there, I recommend that you use the long form every time. Okay. When we go into term, obviously, it's like this is how much longer the broker obligation, client obligation. You can see that these things are still here, right? But they're condensed. Okay. Now I want you to pay attention to number 5 on the short form. If you're going to use this form, okay, this is kind of important. So if you say full services, right, broker will use broker's best efforts to assist client in acquiring product in this area. Okay. Full service. Showing service, they say these paragraphs do not apply. And that is important because you're basically saying 6, 7, and 8 here, client obligations don't matter. Okay. So they have no obligation to you. You're saying the compensation that I put in here doesn't matter. I'm not entitled to anything. And the intermediary, you know what I mean? Doesn't matter, right? Like we're not doing any of those things. But what are we doing? So if you look, it says broker will provide client with access to properties in the market area. Client will pay broker a fee of blank. So basically,
So on the long form, it doesn't have that full service showing service on there.
No, it does not. No,
Okay.
because on the long form, it's not there because you're not, it's just saying broker obligations.
Yeah.
It's not saying we have this option. And that's why this is important, because it is different. So let's say you have somebody that's from out of town. They said, hey, I'm going to be here tomorrow. I have one day. I want to see 4 properties. And you can give them basically a trial run and say, okay, I'm just going to do showing services. I charge $25 a door, so it's going to be $100. You can pay me $100. I'll show you these houses. If you want to use me, then maybe I can give you that money back, or you know what I mean. Then we can talk about that. But that's what you would use that for.
That's actually kind of nice.
I mean, it's good if you think that it may not pan out to anything. If they're like, yeah, I'm out of town, and I'm only here for a day, and okay, well, have you talked to a lender? Do you have pre-approval? No. Okay, well then maybe let's just do this, because I don't even know if you can qualify. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it can come into place, but I wouldn't make a habit of using it for all your clients. You know what I mean? Like you definitely. Here's the rule right now with TREC, okay? And you can see it when you go on showing time and try to schedule things. You can see it. You are not allowed to show houses without one of these 2 in place, okay? That is the rule. So you can easily use that to your advantage to say, hey, I'd love to show you a house, but I got to have this in place. And if I got to have you sign something, I'd rather you just sign the big one. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I'd rather just be your agent if I've got to have you sign something than this. But there are circumstances that you may want to do that. Okay. The broker compensation on both of them. Let me go to that one here. So you can see on this one, there's more explanation here. It's saying basically that these things are not fixed, blah blah blah. But this box is pretty much the same on both of them, right? And this is new. It was there before, but it's like boxed, highlighted, a little bit more wording, So you can basically say the percentage of the sales price or a flat fee and you can say what you're going to get for the lease. Okay.
Would you put 6 there? And because then you're dividing it, or would you only
No,
put
because
30?
this is a buyer rep. So we're
Oh,
getting 3%, right? Now, it's important to understand that when you put that in and they sign it, okay, they are then obligated to 3%. So regardless of if, because we can't see what the compensation for buyers are in the MLS anymore, right? So so regardless of what they're offering, okay, we have obligated the buyer to 3%. Okay, so what does that mean and how does that look? Well, if you have a couple options. So with that, you can just say, okay, I'll show you whatever, and then we'll buy whatever. And if they're not paying 3, then you can pay the difference. I personally don't want to do it that way. I wouldn't do it that way because you might be blindsiding your client into paying when they don't want to do that. So my view on it is we tell them up front, listen, my fee is 3%. We're going to do everything we can to get that from the other side. Now, if you look at B right here, source of compensation, it explains that. So you can literally read that to them. Broker will seek to obtain payment fee schedule from 7A first from the seller, landlord, or their agents, right? If such person refuses or fail to pay the broker the specified amount, client will pay broker the amount specified less the amounts broker receives. So if they pay 2%, I'm only going to charge you 1%. What I am doing currently is and luckily I haven't really had to push the issue, because every time I showed a property and told them, hey, we're pretty interested, I think we're going to submit an offer, which just happened last week. They were like, okay, great, go ahead and put 3% in. That's what we're paying. Perfect, because she knew it was coming. You know what I mean? Because the thing is like, I am not going to put in an offer until I know. Because if you say to me, we're not pay, let's just say it's a $300,000 house, okay? So that's a $9,000 commission. If you're telling me that you're paying none of that, then I'm going to ask you for $10,000 in concessions with whatever offer, right? Because now
Okay.
I just got the money from you one way or the other, right? From the thing. And what I don't want to do though is I don't want to lower the price, because let's say your client's using an FHA 3.5%. Well, that's going to increase their monthly payment, or it could decrease their monthly payment, but like $10, $20. It's not necessarily good for your client, because they're still having to pay you that $9,000 out of pocket, right? So I would rather get concessions so that we can apply that towards my commission. Does that make sense? Questions?
So do we think sellers are more inclined to, like, if they're not going to pay the commission for the buyer's agent, well, then could you just go back and go, okay, well, say my commission would be $9,000, just take that off, like you said, with the closing costs, like $10,000 in concessions. Would they be willing to drop those prices or anything? I mean,
you mean the seller? Would the seller be willing to drop?
Willing to, like.
Well, I mean, that's a negotiation, right?
House, I mean, they're paying it anyway, so I guess.
Yeah, it's like you said you didn't want to pay. Basically the seller is saying they don't want to pay the commission, and what I'm saying is I don't want my buyer to pay the commission, so I'm just going to ask you for closing costs, and we're going to use that for the commission. So they're going to the seller, it's going to end up being as if they're paying it, but we're doing it in a different way. You know what I mean? So because a lot of buyers have the money to come out of pocket.
You're really not getting that. I mean, I'm not seeing that really, because people know if they're not going to pay, people aren't going to show their houses. They're going to.
Have you ever ran across any sellers that aren't offering commission?
Not that aren't offering anything. I mean, there's some people out there doing 2%. You know what I mean? And that's fine. We saw that before. You know what I mean? So I don't think anything has really changed there. And I really hope that other agents, and I really ask that all of our agents have this conversation with sellers. Like, you can do that, but one of two things is going to happen. One, they're not going to buy the house because they don't want to come up with an extra $10,000 out of pocket. The buyers don't, right? So they're going to pass. And two, they're if they do put in an offer, they're going to ask for closing costs or something to make up for that. So you might as well just do it. I mean, you know what I mean? It's not like you're not going to get away with anything. The other side is not stupid. They're also represented. Um, so if you have that conversation up front, I think that um, that most sellers will understand, and I think that if they do want a little bit of a discount, then as a listing agent, I think it is more appropriate for you, if you're doing the negotiation, to negotiate with your money, not someone else's. You know what I mean? So if they want a discount, then you need to talk with them about your commission, not the other side's, because they are doing their job. They are bringing you a buyer. That, you know what I mean. So you can negotiate with them, but don't cut the feet out. And if it's like egregious, like they want to go really low, and you want to do like 2.5% to the buyer side, okay, whatever. But don't offer them 2%. Don't, you know what I mean? And if someone's being that cheap, then maybe you just don't need the listing.
Yeah.
Because imagine what happens when we get an inspection back and there's repairs and there, you know what I mean? It's like the whole process is going to be a pain in the ass if we're already starting out this way.
Right.
So, and right now houses are on the market for a little while, and if they are, then every week, do you want to have that phone call like, why aren't you selling my house? What's wrong with you? You're not marketing it right. It's not the price, it's you. Do you really want to deal with that? And if you're a new agent and you don't have any listings or anything going on whatsoever, yes, you do want to deal with that. Sorry, you don't get the luxury. You need to pay bills.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it will be tough, and just but I always feel it's better to have those conversations up front, both with buyers when they're signing this, and with sellers when you're signing a listing agreement. Just be upfront with them. This is what it is, especially the buyer's side on what we're talking about right now. Because you basically have to tell them it's going to be 3%, but I'm going to try to get it from them. I'm going to do everything I can to get it from them. And if we can't get everything from them, we'll cross that road when we get there. So there's that. You can see. Okay, so moving on. Well, we already kind of talked about this, but they added this part so that they know that. That they're going to have to get it from you if not. So this was added to clarify that it's coming from the buyer. Everything else on here is, I don't think, changed. Now you can see on this one they skipped straight to the intermediary on the short form and have a whole lot of talk in here that is basically no one's going to read, right? But on the long form, they're talking about additional compensation for construction service providers that might be on there. And so this is information depending on the situation, but on most of them you want to have this in there. If they choose a construction property, you still want to get compensated. So you want to put something in there. It may not be the same. Let me just touch on that. So if it's a like subdivision builder and the house is under construction, yeah, you're going to get paid whatever they're offering, right? But this is more for like, if it's a custom home and you connect the two, right? Like it's a lot and they say we'll build on your lot or whatever, and you connect the two and they decide to do business, that somebody is going to pay you whatever you say. Now you may not want to put as much there. You might want to put 2%, because realistically you're handing them off and you don't have to do anything anymore. You know what I mean? So you don't have to do near the amount of work. So you may not put a full 3 in there. You might say, hey, if you find a builder and I show you a lot and they build on you, I'll charge you 2%, because basically you get to hook them up and then walk away. So I usually will put like 2% in there or something like that, but I don't do the full amount because I'm not really doing my full job. And I find that to be more agreeable with builders. Okay. Protection period is all the same. But if you notice on this one, on the short form, there is no protection period. So you could show them a house under this showing service, right? And they could buy it tomorrow and not use you, and there's no repercussions whatsoever. You could even have full services, but this form does not protect you for a protection period. So if you put in there these dates and they either terminate or wait until that's done. So if you use a short form and you just like, oh, I'll just do a month or whatever, and they wait and they do it, there's no protection period for you. Okay, so that's a big difference. Okay. Trying to think, there's nothing else on this that has changed. So this is the intermediary. This is, I believe this is the same, but they just highlighted it because I think they wanted people to read it more and understand it. But I don't think it has changed any of this. This was all here before. And just going through this is all still the same. And it's kind of funny because it's like, okay, we highlight that, and then this whole page is highlighted. I mean, not everything needs to be highlighted, or it doesn't make it. It's not standing out anymore. It's the whole page. But so this is the other information and notices I was talking about when they capitalize something. It's going to be explained down here. So I mean, in a nutshell, like you can use this short form for certain things. And it should work fine, but ultimately, like this long form, this 5-page long form has a lot more information and carries a lot more protection for you, and just explains a lot more. So
basically, too, is if you're going to the closing table, you're planning to sell. One is just if you're just simply showing them.
are you're talking about in the short form these two options?
I mean, the short form, you're just showing houses, in my opinion.
They're not your client.
They're not your client. You're just showing them houses because you're not getting pre-qual.
Well, as soon as you have this signed, they're a client. Okay?
Right.
Legally speaking, they're a client.
Probably a day.
Well,
they wanted to do a month.
Yeah, but it's not defined. You could put in whatever you want. You could put in a year. You know what I mean? You could still do that. And if you hit full services, then you are fully their client. They are fully your client. It's the same. But
you're not.
But
you don't get that.
You don't have the protection period, and then go back up to.
So just never do that one. Always do the long form.
If you want to sell them a house. Yeah. If you want to sell them.
So it doesn't explain the obligations. It doesn't,
That's just kind of dumb that they even did that.
It's for if somebody comes to town. Because remember Zillow did the thing where I'll show you 5 houses or whatever. So basically, one is I'm gonna show you 5 houses.
Yeah.
To me, that's what number 1 is.
Yeah.
So the only reason I would use the short form, the only reason I would use it is, like I said, if somebody's out of town or like they're non-committal and they don't want to do anything, then I would literally just say, okay, then if I'm just showing you homes, I charge $25 a door. How many homes do you want to see? And if they're like, well, I'm not paying that, well, then I'm not wasting my time. You know what I mean? Like, you're saying you don't want me to be your agent. You don't want to be my client. You just want me to show you these houses, but you don't want to pay me to do so. Right. Goodbye. You know what I mean? Like,
I mean, I'll be honest with you. I always make sure that my clients are qualified before I take them to see homes. So basically, they don't even have to be pre-qualified. You're simply just opening doors for them.
Yes.
That's all you're doing with that.
And that's the only reason you would use that showing services and do that thing. Yeah. Now, according to Texas Realtors, you can use this form because they put full services in there and they have most of the stuff there. You can use this form for everything. You really could, but there is less protection for you. Okay, and there is less definition for them to understand what this relationship is. Right. So I would recommend to my agents, don't use this unless you're just charging for showing opening doors. I wouldn't use it. You got it. Like I said earlier, you have to make them sign something anyway. Okay, so they might as well sign the 5-page and the 1-page because we all know that most clients aren't going to read the whole thing anyway. So what's the difference to them? Once you get over the hurdle of them actually signing something, it might as well be the full form.
So I have a question. So let's just say Destiny's going out of town and she's like, hey, Tammy, I have a client from Houston. They're coming into town and they just want to see these 5 houses. Can you show them these 5 houses? Is she getting this signed or am I getting this signed?
If they're your client, you need to have something signed. She's just doing you a favor.
Well, what if she already has a buyer's representation, the long form filled out? Would Tammy maybe not have to, but would she be able to?
Like they're Destiny's client?
No, because just like with any representation, you can't have representation on top of representation. If a client is represented, you can't talk to them.
Okay.
But okay, there's nothing wrong with if Destiny has an agreement with somebody but wants Tammy to show 4 houses. There's nothing wrong with Tammy saying I charge X per door. You know what I mean? Like, you're ultimately going to get the commission, right? But if I'm showing the houses, which is half the work, you know what I mean? Like, I charge $25 a door. You know what I mean?
But she can go show. I can ask her, hey, I'm booked. I have a client that needs to see. Can you show house and her not have to have something?
She doesn't have to have it signed because you're acting on her behalf. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. She's working with you.
Would that be her $25 a door? Would that be paid through the client or through the listing agent?
That would be paid through the agent that has the agreement with the buyer. Not a listing agent, no, because we're talking about buyers. It's a buyer agreement. She has a buyer agreement. So you would pay her to show the houses for you.
Kind of like when Jessica used to call you and say, hey, will you show these houses? I'll pay you $100.
She never paid me for that.
Yeah.
Rude.
Ever.
I showed like 4 houses, and then the lady that I was showing houses.
What? So? Do you think they're gonna watch it? So, what? Hey, I'll say it again. That's rude. You should have paid him. I have no problems with that.
Now, if it's a new build and we only put the 3% and they're offering the 6%, we have to do the addendum, right?
Okay, so in that situation, it would be, you could do it, but let's think about what you're having them sign. You're saying that your client will pay this amount and I will try to get it from the other people. If the other people are paying more, who has a problem with that? Nobody, right? Nobody. If they're paying less, then the buyer's going to be like, well, wait a minute, how much do I have to pay? So this is more setting out like a minimum. You know what I mean? Like, this is what I'm going to get paid. I've never had any situation where I needed to redo it. Now, if you just want to, cross all your T's, dot all your I's, then yeah, you could say, okay, we're going to do an amendment to the buyer's agreement to say that it's 6%, so that the buyer can't say then, hey, that's my 3% because I only have to pay you 3%. Like, you know what I mean? You can certainly do that just to make sure, but I've never come across like a situation where, one, the buyer even asked, and 2, it was required by them to pay me that amount. I've never seen it.
So you're saying by this agreement, we're not bound to only
That it doesn't say that anywhere. It doesn't say that you only get 3%. It's basically saying this is what you're getting from the client. So it's saying when earned and payable, client will pay 3% of the sales price or X.
So what does the seller's agreement say now? The listing agreement.
So it is the next one that we're going to go into. But if there's any other questions on the buyer rep, I mean, to like formally answer your question, Angie, if you do have that situation, it's a good idea to have an amendment. I've just never had it come into play where somebody asked. However, I've never had it come into play where I had to show somebody my buyer agreement, but I sure as hell get those. You know what I mean? So it's a good idea. Anybody else on the buyer's forms? Questions, comments, concerns? What's that?
I think it's on the listing one.
Oh, it's on the listing agreement.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Because on there, I still put
For the amount paid?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go to the listing one. Okay.
Okay. That's fine.
So again, on these have already been updated, so I don't actually have the like lined out portions of them. But we'll go through them. So obviously the parties, this is all still the same, right? Like there's no changes here, no changes to the property. This is all the same. Improvement, essentially, this is all the same. Okay, they may have moved some things around a little bit, But the biggest thing you're going to see is the compensation here. So, and this is a big box, multiple box. So this is where we're going to spend our time on this because everything else is pretty much the same. Again, okay, they added in this big section that says that this is not fixed, not, not controlled, recommended, anything like that, okay? So it's saying to complete A or B only, okay? So you're not filling out both, you're filling out one or the other, okay? So you're either with compensation for the other broker or you're not, okay? So right there it tells you you have to have the conversation, right? What you're paying them, okay? So let's go through the first box with compensation to other broker because that's what we're going to use 99% of the time, okay? So it looks a lot like the buyer's rep, right? Okay, so when earned and payable, the seller shall pay broker X% or a flat fee. Now, you can see also they have a blank here. I don't know what you would use that for, honestly, but I mean, personally, I wouldn't take payment in somebody's boat or trailer or something, you know what I mean? But I mean, I don't know. You could, it's just a line in case you need to put something in there. I wouldn't recommend using it unless it is a very strange situation. And then I would consult my broker first, right? I would, so, so you're either going to be a flat fee or a percentage. So typically you're going to put 6% in here, right? Okay, so now this is all highlighted. So if the other broker procures a buyer that purchases the property, seller authorizes the broker to pay and broker will pay the other broker the following amount. So if they represent the buyer or if they're a sub-agent. Okay, well, what do we know about sub-agents right now? So sub-agents are somebody that do not have a buyer rep agreement.
I always put 0 for those anyway.
So with the new TREC rule, okay, where you can't even show a house without an agreement, how often are we going to see this now?
Never.
Probably never, right? I mean, it just like, it doesn't make sense, right, for it to happen.
Legally, how would that happen?
Good question. So the only way it would happen is by appointment. Okay, so if let's say I'm representing the seller and I find a buyer. And I say, okay, well, I'm not going to represent both sides. So I'm going to, Ty, you can have the buyer, right? And I'm going to pay you 2% or 3% or whatever, right? Then you are technically a sub-agent because you don't have a buyer rep agreement with that person. However, as your broker, let's say you and Destiny are doing this, I would recommend that you get a buyer rep agreement so that you can actually represent them because that's better for that client. And if I'm appointing, because a broker's the only one that can appoint. So if you say you got this, I technically appoint that buyer to you. If I'm going to appoint that buyer to you, I'm going to tell you to get a rep agreement because if not, then you work for her who works for me. So you're both representing the seller and the buyer's not getting really anything out of it.
Yeah.
So why would you do that? What would be the point of an appointment? Because the appointment is to remove the appearance of colluding against the buyer. So if you don't have an agreement, it still looks like, and technically you still do work for him. So I would recommend you don't do that. But that would be the case. That would be the case is if I appointed it to you and you then worked with them but didn't represent them, then that would be a sub-agent. Okay? But in reality, there's very little chance that it's ever going to happen, right? So you can do one of two things. You can, like Destiny do, you can put 0%, like I'm not paying you, or you can put 2%, or you can put 3%, or you can put what, you know what I mean? You could put something in there or don't leave it blank. Like it's either 0 or it's something, right? Personally on mine, I put 2% on all of them. And that is because historically, when that happens, it's typically like, I'm from out of the area. I don't have the MLS. But I have this buyer that wants to do this. And they would put like, if they're non-MLS, right? It wasn't.
Wouldn't that be like a referral?
It should be because they're not geographically competent. But you see that, and so now that I'm thinking about it, it's like, yeah, there used to be a spot for non-MLS, and I would put 2% for non-MLS, because if I have to give you the information and I have to provide all this to you, then I'm paying you less. But now it's just straight sub-agent. So you could put an amount in there. You can't. It's up to you. What's really important, though, is what you put into A, right? What are you paying the other side? Because it's saying that by signing it, the seller is saying you're giving X amount to the other side. Okay, so that's what's really important here. Somebody's got the munchies. Okay, so now if you're not, it's pretty self-explanatory. If they're not paying any fee, then you're just going to put in there on B that you're charging whatever it is that you're charging personally. Does that make sense? So if the seller is not paying the buyer's commission at all, then you're going to use B, which is basically you're saying you're going to check A and you're going to say I'm charging 3%, or I'm charging whatever my charge is for me, and we're not paying the other broker anything. Okay.
So you're putting A that you're just getting paid, so it'll just be 3%.
Yes.
You're only doing your.
Really?
Okay.
After we're not one.
Yeah. So now this is a new checkbox here. Okay, so authorization to disclose seller paying buyer's expense. Now we all know that we cannot do this on the MLS. We cannot do this on showing time. But you want to put. I can't imagine a seller ever saying no. Don't disclose that, right? Because as soon as you talk to somebody and they ask you, well, how much is the seller paying? You need to have this checked so you can say what they're paying. Otherwise, you're not allowed to tell them. And if you're not allowed to tell them, who's going to submit an offer? Like ever. Okay, and if you're saying you're not allowed to tell them, that's already telling the other side that you're not paying. Right? So you want to put that you want them to authorize you to disclose what's being paid. Okay? It's just going to make things a lot clearer and better. Okay? This is all the same. Earned, payable, compensation, other fees. Yeah, this is all still the same. Again, the protection period is in here. So this is new. I guess. Well, I guess they reworded this, but it's pretty much the same. So on the old form, it said you had like 5 days to put it in the MLS, but the TREC rule was that you had 1 day. So this is just an update that they put in there that you have 1 day to publicly market it. That is to discourage you from internally marketing. It doesn't really come into play with like brokers our size, but if you look at Keller Williams Remax that have hundreds of agents, if they just market it internally, then it's not fairly being put out to the public. So they're kind of trying to get you to not, like the big brokers, to not try to find a buyer from within so that they get both sides of the commission. They're trying to make it fair for all to acquire that property, which has always been the case. It's just they changed the 1 day rule and made it clear on here. Okay, so these are all the same. Yeah, that's all still the same. I don't know why anybody would want you not to post in the MLS, but there's a section for that. The underlined part here is new. It just says that seller further acknowledges and understands that if this option is checked, the property is publicly marketed by anyone, including seller. MLS rules require that broker file in the MLS within 1 business day. I guess just saying that if you're checking that you're not putting it in the MLS, that anybody publicly can market this because it's not in the MLS. So
people ever list outside of the MLS? I mean, why would you?
I've seen it. Some do. I don't know if it's like just to cut down on like showings, or so that basically somebody has to go directly through the agent to inquire about the property. Then I guess it cuts down on tire kickers, and it only really comes into play when you have a really hot market. Somebody might want to do that because they don't want 15 showings a day, like if they're elderly and still living in the home. There's reasons for it, but it's very rare. Okay, this is all the same. Key box lock on the property, all the same. I think they needed to take 8 out, but they forgot because all it says is reserved. Yeah, I don't know. Intermediary is still the same. Obviously, you want to allow them intermediary. You want to put that on there, but the likelihood is low with our size of broker. But that's all the same. That's all. I think everything else is the same. Yeah. Everything else is the same. Definitions, yeah. So that's it.
The T47 thing.
Well, that's a different form, but yeah. So I don't have that up, but the T47, does everybody know what that is?
I know the number. I recognize it.
So that's the form. That's the form for the survey that has to be notarized. So they have created and are putting in place, probably with the other contracts, the T47.1. That is going to, it's the same thing, but it does not have to be notarized. So they can just attest on their own by signing it that that nothing has changed since they moved in, which is good because that was always a thing. Like within 3 days of the contract, you have to have the existing survey notarized, blah, blah. And people are like, I can't do it in 3 days. And it's like, well, it's been on the market for 3 months. You had time, So that's always been a contention. And a lot of times people miss it completely. And then the T47 ends up getting notarized by the closing agent at closing, which is completely out of contract. So I'm glad that they did it because it makes the process easier. It's just going to be another form that we're going to have the sellers sign, and it doesn't have to be notarized, and it's just like any other form now. So that'll be good. Other than that, I think that's it. Any questions on that? Okay, cool. That's it then. That's the class.
We made it.